Joined now by two members of the Impeachment Committee, Democrat Patrick Maloney, Republican Chris Stewart. Thank you both for joining us this morning. And Congressman Stewart, I want to begin with you, but there have been some new developments since Friday's hearings. You have that testimony of David Holmes, who was with Ambassador Sondland as he talked to the president about getting the Ukrainians to investigate the Bidens. Also, Tim Morrison, a White House official who testifies that Ambassador Sondland was acting at the direction of President Trump when he spoke to the Ukrainians about exchanging military aid for political investigations, testified that Sondland spoke to President Trump at least 5 times. The evidence is building about the campaign to trade military aid in a White House meeting to investigations directly to President Trump. It's tied directly now to President Trump, isn't it?
Well, I disagree with you, George. I don't think the evidence is building at all. And I'm being sincere in this. I think the evidence is crumbling. I think the Democrats know they're in trouble on this, which is why we keep moving the goalposts. We went from some supposed quid pro quo and as you said, tying these investigations to withholding military aid, but we know that didn't happen. And now Ms. Pelosi comes out and says, well, we're going to impeach and remove the president for bribery. But, you know, we didn't play this clip where I asked the ambassador, do you have any evidence at all that the president committed bribery or is involved with that? She said, no. Do you have any evidence at all that the president did anything criminal or illegal? And the answer is no. And again, I think the longer these hearing goes on, I think the less the American people are going to support impeachment because I think the evidence just doesn't support it.
Evidence crumbling?
Well, of course not. The evidence is building. And let's get real clear on what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is that the President of the United States used taxpayer-funded military assistance to pressure a foreign leader to help him in his re-election campaign. That is solicitation of a bribe, and that is an impeachable offense listed in the Constitution. And sadly, my friend Chris Stewart is going to get his wish this week when we get testimony from Ambassador Sondland, who at the president's instruction told the Ukrainians either go to a microphone and announce an investigation of the Bidens or there will not be military assistance. That is solicitation of a bribe.
Yeah, I want to pick up on Ambassador Sondland and bring this to you, Congressman Stewart, because Ambassador Sondland's original opening statement, he said, and I want to show it up on the screen right now, I recall no discussions with any State Department or White House official about former Vice President Biden or his son, nor do I recall taking part in any effort to encourage an investigation into the Bidens. You have multiple witnesses testified that, in fact, he did indeed know this was about the Bidens and said so. Do you believe that it's possible that Ambassador Sondland perjured himself in his first testimony?
No, I think this is a pretty simple example where people come back and clarify their comments. It happens all the time, by the way. And I think that he felt like he needed to be more clear. But I got to go back to something that Sean said, and that is, you know, the evidence is building. It just simply isn't true, which is, again, why we keep changing the goalposts. We've gone from quid pro quo to bribery. And we know, look, those of us who work in national security, as I do, sitting on the Intel Committee, former Air Force pilot, we heard as early as April and May that they may withhold this foreign aid. Why? Because we had a new president in Ukraine. We knew nothing about him. He came out of nowhere. We didn't know if he was a good guy or bad guy. We didn't know if he was going to support U.S. interests. It was perfectly appropriate to say we should investigate him. And when they talk about the investigation, they're not talking about investigating Mr. Biden only. They're talking about investigating corruption broadly, which is a perfectly appropriate thing to do.
Well, that is true, but you know the evidence shows that in the April phone call, the president, in fact, didn't bring up corruption, that in the July phone call, he brought up only the Bidens and the CrowdStrike conspiracy from 2016. But more to the point, and I want to get to this, because you talked about this being discussed back in April and May, but it's also a fact that in May, the Defense Department certified that the Ukrainians had met the conditions for fighting corruption, so the aid could be released. That is true, isn't it?
Yeah, but that was on a process based on the previous year. And again, we had something new. We had a new president, an entirely new administration in power now.
Well, except the president had come in April, and this was late May. But Congressman Maloney, let me read you something to you, because this is something else that's come up. You and the Democrats have been talking a lot more about bribery in the last couple of days, and I think it was the Washington Post that reported that you did this after having focus groups determine that bribery was a more salient, that broke through in a better way. Why necessary to have focus groups if you're just supposed to be following the facts?
George, I haven't done any focus groups. What I'm telling you is that Quid pro quo is Latin for bribery. And the fact is that we're talking about abuse of power. We're talking about a number of crimes. You could talk about a felony for soliciting a thing of value from a foreigner in a U.S. election campaign. You could talk about extortion. You could talk about bribery, you bet. And the founders listed that as impeachable in the Constitution. And my friend Chris, of course, has a version of the so what defense. Oh, it happens all the time. But I'm telling you, so what is where our democracy goes to die. We have seen the president, in his own words, clearly focus on the Bidens. His chief of staff came out and told us all why they withheld the military aid. Chris, Mick Mulvaney said it was a quid pro quo, one of 3 reasons he specifically mentioned. And he said, get over it. We do it all the time. I mean, Ambassador Sondland did it at the instruction of the president. We're going to see Bill Taylor, who confirmed it. Tim Morrison, who witnessed the Sondland conversation with the Ukrainians. And if my friend Chris Stewart needs more direct evidence, then Chris, will you join me in calling on the State Department to produce the mountain of evidence, emails, notes, call records, calendar entries? They could produce that tomorrow. Our committee has subpoenaed them. Will you join me in calling on the State Department to produce the evidence?
You bet, because I don't think there's anything there at all that is going to implicate the president. If, Sean,
Great.
You will join with me in calling to hear from the whistleblower, we could protect his anonymity. We could protect him. And how in the world can you impeach the president of the United States and never hear from the person who started that process?
Respectfully, Chris,
we know he was deeply involved with this. How can you say that we don't need to hear from him? And I want to come back to this other thing about the evidence.
Excuse me, Chris. Excuse me. Let me respond to that. First, thank you for joining with me in calling on the State Department to produce the evidence. I hope you'll tweet that out so the White House gets the message that there's now a bipartisan call to stop resisting our subpoena. But, sir, we have heard from the whistleblower. You might have read the complaint. That is the whistleblower speaking. And the law that the Congress passed protects the anonymity of whistleblowers because we want them to use the legal process without retribution.
Okay.
And remember, the president threatened the whistleblower. Said he's a spy and a traitor, should be subject to the death penalty. That's why we're protecting the whistleblower's identity. And of course, we have a mountain of other witnesses and evidence confirming what
Sean.
the whistleblower said.
On. Look, you said we've heard from the whistleblower. Maybe some of you guys have, but the rest of us haven't. You've got a written complaint. Since when in any court proceeding do you have the witnesses, here's a statement, and then you say, well, we're never going to hear from them again? That's all we're going to hear from them?
Let me break in for a question for each of you, because I do hear a little news being made here. First, Congressman Stewart, you said that the State Department should release the documents. Does that also hold? We also know the people closest to this issue, Ambassador Bolton, OMB Director and Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney, and his deputies. The White House is blocking them from testifying. Should they testify with their firsthand knowledge as well?
Look, I don't think there's any of this information that is going to implicate the president. I don't care if they release it. But the other thing is, this is a constant conflict between the executive and the Congress. This has been going on for 200 years. They will make their decision as what's too appropriate or not. But I got to come back to one thing, and I got to make this point. Because a lot of this focus is on the Bidens. And this is something that the Democrats hate to talk about. But imagine this, and I think this is such a fair point. There are dozens of corrupt nations around the world. There are hundreds of corrupt government officials. There is exactly one time where the vice president went to one of these countries out of the hundreds of them and demanded that a specific prosecutor be fired, gave a 6-hour time limit for that to happen, and it is the one time that individual was involved with corruption who was paying his son. So, Sean, if you want us to release documents, not only should we hear from the whistleblower, we should hear from Mr. Biden. We should try to understand what happened there and how tied was that to some of the concerns we have regarding corruption.
Your response?
Well, of course, this is a continuation of the smear against the Vice President Biden and his family. But listen, Chris, if you want to have a conversation, excuse me, Chris, I didn't interrupt you. Chris, excuse me. Chris, excuse me, I didn't interrupt you. If you want to have a conversation about how the sons of powerful people or the children of powerful people, benefit from their parents' office holding, I'm happy to have that conversation. And I say we invite Donald Trump Jr., Eric, Ivanka, and Jared to join in.
Well, Ken, okay, so that'd be great. Let's bring that in if you'll agree that we should bring in Mr. Biden. Would you agree with that then?
We are not going to participate in the ongoing effort to smear Americans who were the target of this presidential abuse of power. Chris, I know that you guys want to change the subject, but the point is, Hunter Biden has no information about what the president did. The direct witnesses and the evidence you're calling for, and the information at the State Department that you've now joined me in calling to be released, that is the key evidence of what the president did. And that, of course, is our proper focus as the Oversight Committee and as the impeachment inquiry.
You know, I think it's interesting that you call it a smear to state the facts, because the facts are pretty damning. And all I'm asking, and all I'm saying is, these are the facts.
Okay, I want to quickly, before we go, one last point. That tweet from the President Trump during the hearing with Ambassador Yovanovitch, do you consider that grounds for an article of impeachment?
Oh, look, it's obviously wrong. I mean, let's just be plain. And the president is intimidating a witness in real time. How have we come to the point where decent people like Chris Stewart have to defend that kind of conduct? This is a person who was kneecapped for doing the right thing, served her country honorably for 30 years. I've never seen a standing ovation in a hearing room before. And in the hearing room, the Republicans are praising her and calling her a great American, and the president is attacking her viciously, which of course is simply a continuation of the campaign he launched in February and March and April to defame her. It's wrong.
Congressman Stewart, you get the last word. Of course, you've made the point that presidents have a right to fire ambassadors. The question is, why did President Trump fire Ambassador Yovanovitch, and was it right to smear her reputation in the way he did?
Yeah. Look, the president communicates in ways that sometimes I wouldn't. I was asked about this earlier and saying intimidation, and I just think it's nonsense. She's extraordinarily strong and powerful individual. I really doubt she's intimidated by a single tweet. But if your basis for impeachment is going to include a tweet, that shows you how weak the evidence for that impeachment is.
Congressman, thank you both for your time this morning. Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.